It's a pleasure to be here with you this morning. Thank you so much. And I'm sorry not to be there in the room with you. I would like to start by sharing my presentation with you. It seems that perfect. It seems that let's see. I can now put this up for you. Today, as was mentioned, I'm going to be talking about the challenges that digital education and how we can look in using challenge-based learning and entrepreneurship in looking at developing digital learning. And as was mentioned, I'm the president of the Policy Experimentation and Evaluation Platform, which is an accredited NGO for development in Portugal. We look at evidence-based public policy in research and education and support the twin transitions of the green and digital future. We have done quite a few different projects looking at very much developing skills and in education, looking at research and innovation, as well as looking at local and regional development. And I'll talk a little bit more about this, but much of our work...
Mr. Redford, excuse me, for the people that are live here, there's a small technical difficulty with the sound. We cannot hear you. The stream can hear you just fine, but just wait a couple of minutes so we can hear you in the room.
Okay, okay.
Thank you very much.
Tell me when to start.
I will. Pentru că la camera hotărât. Choose which video settings. A ti si mi preklopil drugo kamero.
Tukaj imaš preko tebe, da ne vem te.
Samo stavim tu kamera kaže. Mogoče lahko na takšno. Okay. Čakaj, sem vam.
Evo ga. Jaz ti bom dal pa moj kom, da bo šlo še noter, evo. A se slišimo?
Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Yes, now I can hear you.
Yeah. Applause. Do you hear that?
Yes, I hear all of you. Thank you so much.
Okay, so again, welcome, Dr. Redford, and the screen is yours, please.
Great. Well, once again, I'm so sorry not to be there. I love Slovenia and your lovely capital. And I'm very excited to be discussing with you today this important topic, looking at the changing face of digital education and looking how we can use entrepreneurial didactics and challenge-based learning to really support this dual transition, which is one of the things that our NGO has been working on. So the Policy Experimentation Evaluation Platform, which I'm president, is based in Lisbon, Portugal, as you had mentioned. It's an NGO for development, meaning we work both in the European panorama as well as in Africa and the Middle East. And we support evidence-based public policy making and looking at research, education, and innovation. So today I'll be speaking with you a lot about skills and competencies. These are some of the aspects which we support. And we look at research and innovation as well as ecosystems. Some of the other projects that we're involved with is supporting the entrepreneurial ecosystems in Africa. And indeed, I will be transported live to Portuguese-speaking Africa in about 2.5 hours to present with them about entrepreneurship education, supporting those aspects. We also look at local and regional development, which is a key factor for looking at ecosystems and looking how we can be most relevant to our communities. So our experience really lies in different fields. So we look at supporting these EU development funds and looking at the innovation transition. The main thing that I wanted to talk about with you today is this aspect of key competencies. So the competency frameworks that we look at are really a point of departure. So you can see that the council has recommended that the key competencies be looked at from different angles. Of course, one of them being digital competencies, but also those that support STEM, language, general literacy, cultural awareness and expression, entrepreneurship, civic education, and of course, personal and social learning. So this sort of panorama of competency frameworks and how we can look at key competencies really have guided the development in the past 5 years in the European Commission, and I think gives a good point of departure for what we need to do to innovate in digital education. So to talk about some of these competency frameworks, one of them being the Life Comp, that is this tree here that you can see. And Life Comp has various aspects to it. So life competencies looking at self-regulation, flexibility, well-being, but also aspects that also border on entrepreneurship competencies, empathy, communication, collaboration, this idea of a growth mindset and critical thinking, managing learning. And so we can see how, in terms of the competency frameworks, they overlap one another. And so if we're going to innovate, we need to be focused on how we can innovate from these overlapping positions. So in the wheel here, the flower, you can see EntreComp. EntreComp is the Entrepreneurial Competency Framework, which is something that I helped develop with the Joint Research Center in Seville, that looks at these competency frameworks and has been developing them at the request of the European Parliament. So if we look at entrepreneurship competencies, of course, entrepreneurship is defined as, can be defined several ways, but in European panorama, it is putting ideas into action. If we look at the panorama of the United States, the Harvard working definition on entrepreneurship is the pursuit of opportunity beyond the resources we currently control. And if you think about both these definitions, they look at resources, they look at action, they look at both a mindset and a skill set. And that really is what we think about when we talk about both digital and entrepreneurial competencies, as well as life competencies. We want people that are open, that are ready to work on putting ideas into action, searching out opportunities, and marshaling and using resources in the best way. And of course, we know that resources themselves are embedded in the resources are embedded in networks that we have. So you have this social aspect, which is why these competency frameworks really work so well together, and there are so many overlaps. So now I wanted to just turn the point here of talking about this point of departure, and to say that competency frameworks are also meant to have a sort of progression to them. So the first one is awareness, the awareness of, let's say, entrepreneurship as a possible career choice, or if you look at digital competencies, understanding to protect one's data, to understand the sort of competencies of working in a digital world. So we go from awareness to exploration, to integration, expertise, looking at leadership and innovation. So this progression as we go through our academic lives, as well as our lives in work, this can be a transition that we go through. And you can see here the curiosity moves to meaningful use, moves to strategy, moves to reflection, and moves to critical thinking and renewal and innovation. So these are the sort of ways in which these competency frameworks can be used. Of course, if we look at the digital transformation, we really have what all of us have gone through and what we are currently going through, and the COVID-19 pandemic having really done more for digital transition than any type of European project or policy could ever do. So now we understand the boundaries and can push digital competencies forward. So we look at this as being opportunities. So how can this be done? So let me give you a few examples of some programs that I've worked on that integrate digital competencies and other competencies. So there are two possible approaches to digital competencies. One is embedding digital competencies into all learning outcomes. So that is, if you're going to develop what learners should be learning, you have little hints about how digital competencies are important. The other way is to have digital competencies that are very explicit and listed as specific competencies, which can be developed. So both of these have both positive and negative ways of contributing to education and the renewal of education that we see coming in as part of the Slovenian presidency. So if we look at how to develop competencies and look at developing learning outcomes, so that's explicit written statements about what a program should help us achieve. Usually we talk about digital competencies as a list of competencies that can be explicitly focused on and tested. So the advantage of embedding is that it goes across everything. However, if you're going to try to evaluate that, which is one of the key things which our NGO does, and what I think is also key for those of you who are trying to push the boundaries and to develop education in new ways. The other way is a more explicit one, so that you have a very specific type of competency that you want to make sure, and learning outcome that is focused on digital competencies. So in this regard, there's an excellent program which is called the Young Innovators Program. This is a program by the EIT Climate Kick. The EIT, for those of you who don't know it, is the European Institute for Innovation and Technology. The EIT has specific knowledge innovation communities, thus the KIC at the end of the Climate Kick name. So this knowledge innovation community dedicates purely to climate change and to helping that transition. And they have a program for young people called the Young Innovators Program. So we developed a list of learning outcomes. You can see these actually on the Young Innovators website, which I've put here. And this is my first example of how we can take these are challenge-based learning. So if I describe the program for you in a nutshell, it has different components, one being taught in class, another which is a young climathon. So these are events where you take a challenge, usually from the local community. So that can be from a municipality or a local company. And the idea here is that these young people are trying to develop climate change solutions for these companies or for their local municipality. And this is a challenge that is both embedded in class time and then relates specifically to the Young Climathon, which is an event, usually a one-day event, where there's an intense focus on trying to come up with specific actions. So in this regard, we want to make sure that there are learning outcomes specifically that look at both entrepreneurial competencies, because the Young Innovators Program works with entrepreneurship, it works with climate change. So it's an innovation type of program. And also specifically, we want to test that digital literacy and the use of digital tools, as well as forms of gaining information and knowledge, is part of what these people are going to be able to achieve. Young people are going to be able to do once they partake in this program. So an interesting program, the Young Innovators Program. So if you don't know it, I suggest you do. And there is, in fact, in Slovenia, a group of people that are working on the Young Innovators Program. So you can also get involved. The other thing that I would like to say about competencies and about developing new programs and innovation is that the European Commission, in terms of their policy guidance, said in 2014 that every young person should have a real world experience through problem-based learning, challenge-based learning, and that this should be embedded across curriculums. So this is one of the challenges that I personally also took on for myself, and I'll explain a little bit about what program we did to develop this, and also something that we did with Slovenia. So young people should benefit from at least one practical entrepreneurial experience before they leave compulsory education. So this means that it doesn't have to be a class in entrepreneurship. It can be a challenge. It can be some idea plan competition or some other type of non-formal or informal education. And the idea here is that entrepreneurship education should be embedded as a horizontal approach for a whole program, and that we should also support the key competencies of teachers. So in the approach of the Young Innovators program, we actually started with the learning outcomes for educators first. And this is something that then can get translated into the learning outcomes of the young people. So if we look at a specific program that I was the international coordinator of, where, as you can see, we had the Slovenian Ministry of Education and Sports, as well as the Ministry of Education in Austria, as well as the Ministry of Education in Luxembourg and in Portugal, where I'm located. And this was about experiential entrepreneurship education that is embedded in the existing curriculum. So this is about youth entrepreneurship and promoting these key competencies in employability. And you can see the project at youstartproject.eu, but most importantly, you can see if you go to youthstart.eu, you can see the challenges, which are translated and in Slovenian, as well as in German, French, English, Portuguese, and you can have these, and I think now it's translated into French and also into Spanish. But you have these all in the Slovenian language, as well as these other European languages that you can take, and you can use these challenge-based learning tactics. So let me give you an example. We even worked in primary education. So to try to innovate in primary education, for example, one of the challenges that I like most is the trash value challenge. So here you take young people, try to go to the trash, try to find the recycling, and you upcycle. So the idea here is that you are going to take, let's say, something that you find that's not being used around your school area or even in your classroom, and try to build something, make something that could be a toy, can be an experiment, and you try to create something that is of value from something that is ostensibly trash. And this teaches lessons of value creation. It teaches lessons of innovation. It teaches lessons of recycling, and so of environmental stewardship. So a challenge that you have, something simple like this, can go across different types of learning outcomes. And I think that this is a way of really innovating. And the way we do this in the Youth Start program is actually we have educators from different areas of education. So we don't have someone who's teaching an entrepreneurship class. We have foreign language teachers. We have sports and physical education teachers. We have science teachers, history teachers. They can teach a given challenge, and it can be taught from one subject, or it can be taught across subjects. And I think that this is also a way of innovating in terms of challenge-based education. So this is to, again, focus on what were the priorities of the ministries which we were supporting: experiential entrepreneurship education, to go out and do, entrepreneurial thinking, to have this part of the mindset across different fields, and try to gain inspiration from entrepreneurs, and not just focus, say, on business students or economics students. Really, again, this integrated easily into science classes, into foreign language classes, very definitely foreign language classes, because we had the challenges, and we have the challenges in different languages. So it can be a very nice way of exploring culture. It can be a nice way of exploring different words and meanings. History, sports, etc. So really, it's about the learning program. There you have the website, youthstart.eu, and you can find all of the challenges, again, in different languages. So in terms of finally, just a few guiding words about using competency frameworks. So why use these? How can we support innovation from these competency frameworks, and why are they interesting? Well, the first thing is you can do a mapping exercise. If you know the competencies that you want to develop and the learning outcomes, you can then identify potential gaps in learning pathways. You can help facilitate peer learning and describe the outcomes across contexts. And you can identify competencies that should be used and develop assessment tools. One of the things about the Youth Start Entrepreneurial Challenges project is we did what's called random control trials. You probably know this from medicine and from pharmacy, pharmacological solutions. That is to have a treatment, so a drug for the case of pharmacy. In this case, it's an educational program. We have those who take the educational program and those who are part of the control group, what would be a placebo in the pharmacy industry. So through understanding what are the differences between the group that has had the educational program and the group that has not had anything and has continued with their path, you can see the differences. And in that way, we also use random control. We randomize who gets the program. So the idea here is you really have a range of students that should be somewhat identical that have been taken at random to be placed in the group that is getting the treatment or the group that is the control group. And the idea here is that one thing that a framework is not, which I want to emphasize, is it doesn't substitute a curriculum. A curriculum is really a plan on how things progress and develop. It can be very prescriptive on what's going on in each day. So it is not prescriptive in terms of programming content. So this is how I see the use of competency frameworks. So with that, I will now pause and we can take some questions and we can have a discussion. Here's my email. Again, I'm so sorry not to be there today, but I'm very honored to be with you, and I'm looking forward to our discussion. So I'll stop there and look forward to speaking with you.
For your presentation, very interesting presentation. Also raising some questions that are important in general for educational competencies, not only entrepreneurship education. But before I ask you questions, maybe questions from the public here in our room. Okay, students are the first one.
Great.
Okay, so my question for you is, what kind of mindset do you think students should acquire with integrating entrepreneurship into educational system?
Well, that's a great question. I think the mindset aspect is really key. You want young people who are open to new ideas. You want also young people who are looking at finding solutions. These aspects are really key to entrepreneurship. In terms of the mindset, it's also a question of seeking out solutions. It's a question of understanding that we need to reach out to others. So entrepreneurship is really the mindset of entrepreneurship is really that one of growth and one of exploration. So and I also want to emphasize, which I think your question alludes to. Entrepreneurship is not just about starting companies. We definitely don't think of entrepreneurship as company creation. Entrepreneurship is something that is much broader. It's a competency for life. And that can translate into learning. It can translate into working for someone else. It doesn't have to be something, it can be working for the government. It can be working in a school. We talk about entrepreneurial schools, changing that. So really entrepreneurship, the entrepreneurship mindset is a wide one. Thank you for the question.
Okay, are you satisfied with your answer? Okay, thank you. One more question.
Hello, my name is Lucia Gregurkova. I'm from the Ministry of Education from the Czech Republic. And I was very interested in the approaches you described. You mentioned that there are two approaches to digital skills. First, to embed it into the learning outcomes, and then to set digital key competence. It's very actual for us, or very current for us, as we recently introduced a reform of the curricula for elementary school and grammar schools. and we introduced new digital key competence. However, in the future, we are planning to embed these digital competence or digital skills into concrete learning outcomes. I would like to ask you whether you could elaborate more on the pros and cons of these approaches, and whether do you see any room for combination of these approaches? Thank you.
So again, this is a great challenge that you've alluded to here, and I think it sounds like you're taking a wise approach, because first we want to focus on things explicitly, and so if we can have a learning outcome which is specific on digital competencies, then we can. So the main advantage of having something very explicit and more narrowly focused on a specific, so digital education being a learning outcome which is vertical instead of horizontal, is that we can test this. So the biggest worry about doing something that's embedded is then that you cannot test it properly. And so we also have these sort of challenges when we do these policy experimentation projects. So as I described the look of a treatment, of an educational treatment and an educational control group, the question of are you sure that this is the hardest thing to try to test? Are you sure that it was the educational treatment that actually made the difference? And the way in which we make sure that these are happening is we try to make sure that the other experiences, the other educational experiences, are similar in both the treatment group and the control group. But getting back to your question, I think when we're introducing something new, I think it's very important that it is vertical, that it's very specific, and that it can be tested. And then once this has been introduced, then I think we can go to the horizontal approach and make sure it's embedded across different subject areas. And again, embedding it across different subject areas has a really important advantage, and that is that it will then change how we teach, not just what we're teaching. And I think that is the key eventually on making digital skills really a key change maker for young people. But as I explained in the Young Innovators program, we had a big debate on how we were going to develop this, and finally came to the approach that the narrower, because we were talking about climate change across and entrepreneurial competencies, we wanted to make sure that we were able to test them. So we made them more explicit. So I think it sounds like in the Czech Republic, you're doing the right thing in first going vertical and then going horizontal as it becomes more customary. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was the exact questions that I wanted to ask Professor Redford. Because it's important for us that in dealing with teaching, and how to teach and evaluate competencies, how to integrate them. So maybe just one more short questions for Professor Redford, and then we continue with our presentations. Is there any questions? Are there any? Aha, two. Okay, lady was first. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you very much, Dana, for the presentation. Jude Cosgrove from Research Centre in Ireland. You mentioned assessment there, and this is something that I think is probably a key challenge across the EU. How to reform assessment so that it may help to drive the innovation, the cross-curricular thinking, the creativity, the open-mindedness that I think we're all seeking. Do you have any thoughts on this issue from your work?
Yes. So the question of assessment and the way in which we have gone about this in this 3.5-year, €2.6 million project on entrepreneurial competencies and entrepreneurship education was the way in which we followed the students were through questionnaires, through a self-assessment, so a pre and a post test, and we even did a mid test in the middle of the semester. These questionnaires can be quite long, So we were doing a very specific policy experimentation project with these random control trials. But let's say for the more average teacher or someone who really just wants to understand their school, what is the impact that their teaching and their specific project or what they're trying to accomplish is actually being accomplished. In that regard, we can take more simple questions. We can look at, let's start with the previous question. We can also talk about mindsets and skill sets. So if we can identify what are the key things that we want in terms of the change of mindset from the educational experience, or the skills that we want, and make those explicit. We can formulate questions. We can also, there's a lot of great questions that have been already developed in entrepreneurial learning, in digital learning. So we take these questionnaires that have already been statistically validated, and we can do it before and we can do it after. And then what we did, since we had this longer period, is we tested also 2 years afterwards to see how people's how these young people's mindsets and skill sets had changed, these competencies had changed. So really, I think this approach of a pre and post is probably one of the key ways in which, and in terms of evaluation, what I would recommend is trying to find questionnaires that have been already statistically validated. Thank you.
Okay, thank you also for this answer. We will now continue with our presentations, Professor Redford. So I don't know if you will stay in virtually in Confiva platform.
Yes.
Anyway, thank you for your interesting presentation and have a nice day.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.